The citizens of Surat would greet us with sandalwood paste and kumkum, and many times they would come and give us bananas and mangoes and whatever kind of fruit they had, and we were pulled into people's houses from the middle of kirtan and offered, a cold lassi or some sweets, and the whole town was just suffused with Krishna consciousness. The entire town was on fire with devotion. They made us even more spiritual and more devotional. We'd done Harinam in many places, but the people made this an experience of a lifetime. And Prabhupada was tireless. He would speak nonstop. He would greet the children and give them the little sweets, and he would sit for hours and have darshan with thousands of people. People were just so kind to us and so genuinely sweet.
Prabhupada said when we were in Surat, this is a city of devotees. They basically closed the whole town off for Prabhupada. They would close off streets and have parades with him, and every shop would shut down. The man who we stayed at his home, Bhagubhai Jariwala, was a beautiful, small-bodied, elderly, very healthy-looking Indian banker. I remember we all had dysentery there too. It was pretty serious, 20 sick devotees. And they just took care of us. They just kept taking care of us. Whatever we needed, they would take care of it. And at the end, when we left, Bhagubhai Jariwala talked, and he said, I want to thank all of you for this wonderful experience. It's been an honor to serve you. And please forgive me for any offenses I've committed. And he started crying. And Prabhupada looked over at us and he said, just see, this is a Vaishnav. And then he gave us all money after we had been offensive and sick in his house. But they never took offense. They never took the whole family. They just served and served and served and served and served.
I remember in one town where we arrived, that the whole town had closed shop. The mayor came, everyone came to the train station. In other words, the whole town closed down to greet us, to greet Prabhupada. And I don't know who was the mayor, but some dignitary said that even if Indira Gandhi had come to this town, she would not have received the reception that they have organized for Prabhupada. And especially this program in Surat, every day they would take us to a different part of the town to do Harinam. And the devotees were just received like they had just, flown in from a heavenly planet. I mean, it was just overwhelming. I remember at one point I started weeping because I could understand that this is what's meant by Lord Chaitanya's mercy and the flood of the Sankirtan movement. Because just a few years before, we were just on the street, vagrants and hippies and whatever. I mean, the potency of Prabhupada was manifested through his early disciples in settings like Surat in India, where people by the thousands, I mean, they were hanging out the window off the roof in the street. It was packed wall to wall, just enough room for the devotees to pass through. But they were so enchanted and mesmerized by the presence of the devotees chanting Hare Krishna. You could understand that this was because of Prabhupada. We were just following behind him like, little ducklings follow the mother.
Sometimes gentlemen would come to meet Srila Prabhupada and discuss with him. Once I was struck when Srila Prabhupada told one gentleman that the government of India should have a department of Bhagavad Gita. That Bhagavad Gita is the greatest asset of India, and it should be preached all over the world. But then he said, unfortunately, the government is neglecting. quite often he would say that India's ambassadors go all over the world and beg, give me money, give me rice, give me this, give me that. And Srila Prabhupada said, but I am going not to beg, but to give. I'm giving the knowledge of Bhagavad Gita, and people are appreciating. Hare Krishna, Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare.
Before we went to India for the first time in San Francisco in 1967, Achyutananda sent us pictures of Srila Prabhupada on Nagar Sankirtan in Calcutta. And when we saw Prabhupada chanting in the streets of India, in this one still picture, all of us were just praying for the day that we would join Srila Prabhupada. And he said he would take us to India and show us India on foot. And when we were in San Francisco, we had no idea what that meant. But this is what it meant. Going on pilgrimage to a place is one thing, but until you're on foot in the streets, walking as those before us have walked, chanting the holy name, you can't taste India.
Surat is near Dwarka, and so it's a traditionally Vaishnava province. They worship mostly Bal Krishna in the Balabhacharya line, but any Krishna worship is very popular there. And so Mr. Jariwala was very respected in the town. And he, every day he had our kirtan route printed in the newspaper. So people knew exactly which streets we were going to be on. And they had those streets streamered with sari cloth all the way across the roads. Everybody had little white chalk auspicious diagrams in front of their houses on the sidewalk. And they were out there with kumkum and rice and flower garlands to put the red kumkum and rice on our foreheads and garland us. We got so many garlands put on us that after a while we had to take 20 of them off and pass them out to the crowd, and next thing you know we'd have 20 more garlands on. We got garlanded 50 times in the course of each procession. And people were doing artik to us in the street as we went by in the kirtan procession. Basically, that was just a ton of fun.
Generally, the women were placed in the front in Sankirtan in those days rather than in the back. And we all danced in the same way. Or sometimes we were in the middle of the kirtan party and the men surrounded us. Shyamsundar and Koshalya and Yamuna and Malati and Hansaduta, Tirananda, Giriraj, Gopal. This was the time when we met Mr. John Greiser for the first time, who came to film Srila Prabhupada, and he joined our party. I think he was the only non-devotee in our party. And that person later became Yarubara Das.
I first met Srila Prabhupada here in Surat. I'd come to India to do a master's degree thesis in photography on the origins of Krishna consciousness in India. The summer before, I'd done a couple of magazine articles on the movement. That's me in the blue shirt. I brought those magazine articles with me and showed Srila Prabhupada, and he liked them. He went through each of them page by page, much to my embarrassment, because one of them had some nudity in it. Srila Prabhupada didn't bat an eye, he just kept going through until he reached the article on Krishna consciousness. And then his comment was, even when we find gold in a dirty place, we take it. The second day I was there, Srila Prabhupada asked me, so you're going to become a devotee? I couldn't imagine myself wearing the robes and the shaved head, so I said no. Although inwardly I felt I was. So Srila Prabhupada's reply was, then you cannot stay. I was naturally shocked. And I didn't leave. I stayed with the party for 2 months. Every day I'd sit in Srila Prabhupada's room, and invariably when a visitor came in, he'd introduce me. He would say, this is Mr. John. He is from America. He is an expert photographer. In this way, Srila Prabhupada encouraged me, and he could understand I was becoming a devotee gradually.
We were brought into the Durga temple. This one was new, the deity was new, she was nicely dressed and nicely worshipped. When we came into the room, I remember Prabhupada said, do just exactly like I do. And when Prabhupada came before the deity of the demigod, he bowed down before the demigod, just like he'd bow down before the Radha Krishna altar. But instead of putting his left side toward the altar, he put his right side toward the altar. He said, when you bow down before a demigod, you keep the demigod on your right. The understanding is your spiritual master is in front of you and Radha and Krishna are on your left. So you're still bowing to Radha and Krishna and your guru, but you're also offering respect to the demigod at the same time. And that's how you offer respects to a demigod, with your right-hand side toward the altar. In other words, he was respectful to Durga, but he didn't want her worshipped in the same way that we would worship Radha and Krishna. So that's the distinction.
Not only did we have kirtan through the streets of Surat, many times they would invite us outside town for engagements in the villages. And Prabhupada was so available to us at all times. And one time I had gone into his room. We were staying at the house of Bhagavad Jariwala. I went into his room and I told him I had memorized the Sri Upanishad. And so on one of these engagements, after speaking, he called me. He said, Kaushalya, come here. So I came up to him and he said, sing Sri Upanishad. I went, oh God, I'm on the spot now. So I did it. I sang the Sri Upanishad. And the whole time I'm looking at Prabhupada while I'm singing. And his smile, he's gradually becoming more and more pleased, and his smile is getting bigger and bigger. And when I finished, he called me closer to him, and I started to pay my obeisances, and he grabbed my head and put it on his lap and patted me on the back and rubbed my head. I felt like a puppy dog. It was really special.
As in other places, we would go into Srila Prabhupada's room early in the morning and sing the prayers to the spiritual master. So one morning, after the prayers, Prabhupada gave a little talk, and then he asked, why does Krishna come into the material world? So different devotees gave different answers, but Dinanath Prabhu gave the answer that he comes to give pleasure to the devotees. And Srila Prabhupada said, yes, that was the right answer. Because the other purposes could be fulfilled by other agents, but only Krishna could come and satisfy his pure devotees. So after Dinanath gave the answer, Srila Prabhupada said, now you are liberated. Because the Bhagavad Gita says, Janma karma chamedevyam evam yo veti tattvataha, that one who knows about the appearance and activities of Krishna in truth, tattva dehang purnar janma naiti mameti soarjuna. He never has to take birth again, but he goes back home, back to Krishna. When we would come back from the Harinam Sankirtan in the mornings, many of the people of Surat would be following the Harinam party. But although Prabhupada wasn't with us physically on the Harinam Sankirtan, he was in the back of everyone's minds. He was in the back of our minds, because whatever we were doing was for him, and he was in the back of everyone else's minds because he was the great saintly person who had gone to the West from India and taken Krishna consciousness to the foreigners. So when we got back to the Jariwala house, people wanted to see Srila Prabhupada. Prabhupada would be in his room doing his own work, but sometimes the demand of the audience from below was so great that Prabhupada would emerge onto the balcony and give them darshan from the balcony. The throngs were elated, and so were we.